Thanks so much for attending today's webinar, Delivering 20, what 12 months worth of data for Wales might mean for local authorities in the rest of the UK. We at 20's Plenty and the Landor team hope you will find it really useful. So many of you attended the first in our Delivering 20 series of events back in October. If you didn't, the video is on our website or you can watch it on YouTube. With over 700 people registering for today's event, the subject matter is clearly of massive interest. A very warm welcome to you all, and we'll be running future webinars and conferences on the subject, and we hope to see you at all at some of those. My name's Adrian Berendt, and I'm chairing today's event. I'm part of the 20's Plenty team, and as well as our chair and founder, Rod King, MBA, MBE, my colleagues Sue Nichols, Jeremy Leach, and Hannah Greenberg are all here today. 20's Plenty for Us supports hundreds of local campaigns and thousands of campaigns across the UK. Please do contact us if we can help in any way. You can find our details on our website at 20splenty.org. Our thanks to Landor, who've organised this wonderful webinar, and of course, to our wonderful speakers. As chair, I have to run through a few housekeeping matters. It says here that no fire drills are planned during the event. Ha ha. I'll leave it to you to work out your nearest exit route from the webinar. I find Control-Alt-Delete usually works best. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared with everyone 24 hours after the event. It will also be posted on Landor LINKS YouTube channel and on the 20's Plenty website. And there'll also be links on our social media pages. So the format's going to be that I'm going to ask each of the speakers to present for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll be followed by a Q&A panel session. If you can submit your questions via the dedicated Q&A box in Zoom. Because there are so many people on the call, we're not going to be able to enable the chat function today. After the Q&A session, I'll then wrap up proceedings. And then once you log off, there will be a short questionnaire, which will take a few minutes to fill in. Please, can you do that? It really helps Landor and us to plan future events that matter to you. So we've already had over 100 questions submitted. So if we don't get to your question, sorry, but you can always email them in to info@20splenty.org and we will try to answer them. You're also welcome to attend our regular campaigner Zoom calls. Just register on our website. So in your feedback to us so far, what you've asked for is you want access to the data and evidence from the Welsh 20 mile an hour implementation. You'd like to understand the impact of 20 miles an hour, particularly for local authorities in England. You'd like to learn some practical implementation strategies and you've talked about gaining advocacy and campaigning tools and how to address some of the opposition and resistance. I can't promise that we're going to cover all of those topics here today, but we do have lots of resources to answer some of those questions on our website already. And as I mentioned, we do hold monthly Zoom calls when we discuss the topics. So to our speakers, at the first Delivering 20 webinar back in October, I gave brief details about casualty reduction in Wales following the introduction of 20 miles an hour as a national default. I'm delighted that Phil Jones from PJA is here today to update those figures for the first 12 months and to give some more detail about how 20 miles an hour is implemented in Wales. In that same webinar, I said that the national default speed limit of 20 miles an hour on restricted roads is not changing in Wales and that some local councils are accepting up a few roads to 30 miles an hour. So we've now done some further analysis on this. And while he's not actually listed on your list of speakers, Rod King is here to give us a brief update on where that process has got to. Last time, I gave a sneak preview of the work that Insight Warehouse has been doing on mapping 20 miles an hour throughout the UK. Richard Owen from Agilysis has kindly come along today to explain that work in a bit more detail and to show the extent of 20 miles an hour already in local authorities across England. In October, I also spoke about the benefits that drivers in Wales were starting to see through lower insurance premium. Thanks so much, Rob Clark from esure for coming here today to explain exactly how those benefits in risk reduction that you're seeing are flowing through to drivers. I note that the UK government team might want, which is looking into reducing insurance premium, might want to take notice at this point. So to your speakers, and first up we have Phil Jones from PJA. Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. Sorry for slightly jumping the gun there with the slides. I will just give you firstly a bit of background to how Wales got there. Wales in 2017 was given the power to set national speed limits. There was then a political commitment from the then First Minister, Mark Drakeford. A joint task force was set up to make recommendations, which I was very pleased to chair, and those recommendations were accepted with cross-party support. And just to summarise what's happening in Wales, because there is some confusion, I think, as to exactly what happened. It was a pretty simple piece of secondary legislation that was passed in July 2022. It actually came into force just over a year later, on the 17th of September 2023, and it simply changed the default speed limit of roads with street lighting to 20 miles per hour. So the local authority didn't have to do anything. It could do something to put the speed limit, to change that speed limit, but roads that were just restricted roads, the speed limit changed automatically. And the concept of 20 mile per hour zones was removed in Wales, because the idea of having a special zone that was 20 no longer made sense when most roads would be 20. What it also did was change the traffic sign regulations so that there was no longer any need for 20 mile an hour repeater signs in Wales, but repeaters were allowed in 30 mile an hour roads, because they're now the exception. And just dealing with that idea of exceptions, it was always envisaged, and there was a lot of debate about the term blanket. It was never a blanket speed limit. It would apply absolutely everywhere. The concept was always there that there will be some roads, whether through their lack of frontage activity or segregated cycling and walking infrastructure, that 30 miles per hour was perfectly fine, and that was termed exceptions to the national default. So the idea was put forward of a nationally consistent approach, but with local flexibility. And Transport for Wales led on that with some draft speed limit maps based on numeric place criteria and residential density and so on. The guidance to local authorities on how to set those exceptions was published in November 2022, after TfW had trialled those processes. So using the place criteria, and it was based on the aims and the principles of Article 11 of the so-called United Nations Stockholm Declaration. That was a conference in 2020. Article 11 talks about a maximum road travel speed of 30 kilometers, or around 20 miles per hour, in areas where vulnerable road users and vehicles mix in a frequent and planned manner. Now, obviously, that needs some judgments as to what that exactly means, but that's the basis on which that was set, and where 30 miles per hour higher speed limits were possible. And it was also made clear in that guidance that decisions should not be influenced by existing traffic speed. So we still have in England, Circular 113, that talks about 24 miles per hour as an important determinant of whether a 20 mile an hour speed limit should be set. That was removed in Wales, because the idea was this is the default, and this should apply generally in urban areas unless it was safe to do so. And bus routes, similarly, based on experience in London particularly, not determined by the presence of a bus route. So it was a big task that was completed on 17th September. Transport for Wales worked very closely with local authorities to plan those exceptions, the signs, the TROs, and it was a huge achievement to do that with an overnight change. It was all funded by the Welsh Government, making of those TROs and the exceptions, and a fund of around 33 million was put aside to fund all of that. Just to give you the scale of the change was really quite dramatic, though. This was the split of speed limits across the Welsh road network pre that 20 miles per hour change, with over 35% of the Welsh road network being 30 miles per hour, which was that, and the 60 being the national defaults. And then overnight, that pretty much changed to a reversal of around 37% of the Welsh road network becoming 20 miles per hour. So obviously something that happened very quickly that would have taken many, many years to do through the previous process of TROs. And to give you a clue of what that looked like in plan, Richard has some maps as well, but this is North Wales, blue being 30, green being 20 before and after. And then in South Wales, quite a bit more, 20 miles per hour pre-existed in South Wales, but before and after. So a really quite dramatic change. The process of exceptions, I think it's fair to say, wasn't universally applied consistently across the whole of Wales. There were differences in the 22 Welsh local authorities. Some authorities like Bridgend, Blaenau Gwent, Swansea put in exceptions to a fair amount of their road network. Other authorities, principally in North Wales, chose to set fewer exceptions, and that did lead to some concerns and some itself the cause of some disquiet and from the public. Enforcement, though, did begin not immediately but fairly quickly afterwards, and that enforcement was set at a higher threshold and still is at a higher threshold. So in England, and I think in Scotland, in 20-mile-per-hour limits, 24 miles per hour is set as the target. In Wales, still it's 26, and that's been not made a secret of, to give drivers a little more time to get used to it. And this process called Operation Ugain, which is Welsh for 20, was a process whereby the Fire and Rescue Service would offer immediate roadside education within about 30 minutes to send people on their way without having points on their license. So a kind of softer approach, but certainly enforcement was in place from the beginning. But there were some impacts. I mentioned bus routes in North Wales particularly. There was a greater impact on bus routes than perhaps had been thought, because of the rural nature of it had a greater impact, and there were some impacts. And certainly there was a lot of public pushback against it. We know that this was the largest ever petition in Wales, getting on for 500,000 signatures, and so it did cause a lot of objections. However, it is worth bearing in mind this is the distribution of when those signatures in the petition were made, that much of that opposition actually took place very, very quickly, before I would say people had time to perhaps get used to it, and that's not to diminish their concerns, but I think it does indicate that that did not continue to grow beyond that point. Okay, because of that disquiet and various other reasons, it was sensible to review anyway. There was an implementation review which I was involved in that took place between December 2024 and May 2025. Where myself, Karina Ruta from Welsh Local Government Association, and Professor Peter Jones, we were a little team that had meetings with local authorities, bus operators, campaign groups to see how the thing was bedding down. We also looked at how the rollout in Wales could benchmark against UK and international guidance and the distribution of speed limits. What we found was that there was general support in local authorities and stakeholders for that mixing principle, for setting that 20-mile-per-hour limit. It was well understood, and general consensus that was appropriate, therefore, for minor roads that didn't have a major transport function. But obviously, where it gets more difficult, where you've got that tension between the transport function of those main arterial strategic roads, but also aligned with housing, shops and schools. So that is a more difficult question for local authorities to grapple with. Another issue that was some discussion was how flexible, how rigid should any revised guidance be. But the team, Karina, myself and Peter, we did make a recommendation, and that's all published. Review of exceptions, final reports, all on the Welsh Government website. We recommended that the principles of the previous guidance should be retained, that mixing principle. We recommended that most of those speed limit changes now from 20 back up to 30 will be on A and B roads, because there was consensus around minor streets. And what we said was that local authorities are going to have to do a difficult balancing exercise, and this is not something that you can necessarily put into a simple spreadsheet, because there are benefits of a higher speed limit, depending on the importance of the route, better bus services, journey time savings, and we recognise that, but there are disbenefits of that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit too. in terms of collisions and casualties, perhaps less people choosing to walk and cycle, effects on community severance and so on. And that balancing act has to be done at a local level. That was then brought forward in the current exceptions guidance, which, and I should have said actually at the start, I'll include a slide in the deck. There is a slide that you will be given that has links to all of these documents. So the current exceptions guidance is there. It provides a framework to support highway authorities to make those balanced decisions and to consider those benefits and disbenefits of increasing the speed limit on a case-by-case basis. That's the guidance of the Welsh Government. So the criteria, 20 mile an hour is suitable where people regularly mix with motorised traffic. That's the Stockholm principle. Those place criteria are retained, but for main roads that serve as strategic routes, a 30 mile per hour limit can be set, provided it's safe to do so. And also you need to assess, again, whether there are or you could in place segregated facilities for walking and cycling, and is the road geometry itself safe for higher speeds. But to give you the results, so this is a year on, as Adrian said, it's a dramatic fall in the number of people injured, getting on for 2 people a day, not being injured, and that's around 100 people killed or seriously injured. So quite successful. People have asked, and I think there was a question in the chat I saw appear, how can we be sure though that this is not just a continuation of past trends? And the graph is perhaps a little more complicated, but what this is showing is, for different years, what the change in casualties on Welsh roads is for roads that are 20 or 30 miles per hour and 40 miles per hour. And it kind of moves around. Generally, these are moving around the same, some differences. If we look at COVID, we can see that during COVID, casualties went down to a similar degree in both 20 and 30 and 40 mile an hour roads. But in 23-24, completely different. We can see that the trend was completely different on 20, 30 and 40. So something different happened, and what happened was that we changed the speed limit on 20 to 30 mile an hour roads. I think we're pretty confident that the change is due to that. So what can the rest of UK learn from Wales? I think we now have that evidence that 20 is a highly cost-effective road safety measure, not just in towns and cities. The concept of default 20 rather than starting with 30 and where should it be 20, we could consider now 20 being the default, even if it's not the legal default, could be a policy default. That safe systems approach, mixing principle, is consistent with international practice. And I think the idea of instant roadside driver education is an interesting one. We know, though, that journey and bus times can be impacted in rural areas. We've not seen it in London, but we've seen it in North Wales. We can, I think, have confidence 20 on minor streets and in centres. Main streets through residential areas need further consideration. It's a balancing act of benefits and disbenefits. But throughout this whole process, extensive engagement, and perhaps that's another lesson to be learned, that it wasn't quite as comprehensive in Wales as it should have been. But I thought I'd just talk about the process that's gone through in Wales. And Wales set this national default limit, then identified where 30 is appropriate, consult on implementing 30 miles per hour traffic regulation orders, and now in the process of monitoring speeds. There's no traffic calming has been funded so far, but Welsh Government is now considering traffic calming is necessary where speeds remain too high. Now in England, because of the 24 miles per hour and to some extent I think in Scotland, Northern Ireland, what's happening in England, in those places that follow Circular 113, we identify the potential need for a 20 limit. We then measure the speed, and then we put in traffic calming if the speed is above 24. And then we go out to achieve support and consult on that. And that's not always easy to do because traffic calming is generally less popular than lower speeds and 20 mile an hour speed limits and more expensive. And then we implement the limit. And I think there are many pro 20 English local authorities, including Transport for London and others, Cornwall, for example. They take a different approach, which is, I think, closer to what's happening in Wales. Identify the need for 20 limit, achieve that support for that limit, then implement the 20, then measure speed, and then put in the traffic calming if speeds remain too high. And I think that is something, again, we can learn from Wales as a move forward. So that's kind of it from me. Here's some further reading. You'll get the slide deck, and obviously very pleased to answer questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was a real tour de force, as ever. So, I mean, what I take about that is that the reductions in casualties since 20 miles an hour was reduced 28%. That's 678 fewer people injured, including 10 fewer deaths, I think is what I saw. It looks like it's unprecedented, apart from the COVID years. And one other important thing, you confirmed that the national default speed limit is not changing. That's what we hear a lot from people. Oh yeah, but Wales is changing it back, and I think you confirmed that's not happening. So, Rod, I think you're going to give us an update on that and on how individual councils in Wales are approaching the exception making facility, the process of making exceptions to the new default limit.
Yes, and first of all, can I say well done, Adrian, for getting a lot of this conference together with the other presenters and Landor LINKS. So thank you very much. What I'm going to try and do is what is a 2020 perspective on those exceptions to the default 20. It's a bit of a moving situation, but I think it's something which many, particularly those viewers from England and Scotland, will benefit from an update on what's happening. I'm going to try and cover three different areas. That is the issues associated with it, the scale of exceptions, and the expected impact which we expect that to have. Well, first of all, the issues. I'd like to say quite categorically that the 20s plenty are all in favour of 30 mile an hour where it's evidentially safe. And that is a targeted 30 mile an hour where it's safe for vulnerable road users. As Phil has said, the national default limit is unchanged. There are some restricted roads which, as always, can be de-restricted by the local highway authority, and the speed limit increased to 30 miles an hour. The guidance, though, does include specific place and suitability criteria that cannot be ignored by highway authorities when setting different speed limits from the national default. And what that does, it allows nuancing and the correction of anomalies from the September 23 exceptions made by local authorities in Wales. But at the same time, there is the suggestion that inappropriate decisions could be legally challenged, and they could create a future potential civil liability risk for the highway authority if there are casualties and insurance claims on those roads which may have been inappropriately increased to 30 miles per hour. On the scale, two issues really. I think, what is the number of the roads being changed to 30 mile an hour? And what is the nature of those changes? Because they do actually cover a number of situations. Well, in terms of the numbers, what we tried to do here is to trawl through the available information which there is in terms of the local authorities in Wales. We've used Phil's a graph which shows the percentage of restricted roads which were actually accepted to remain at 30 miles an hour. And we've taken a selection of those where we do have the information. For example, Newport, there were 331 roads which were requested to change from 20 mile to 30 mile an hour from the public. They went through them all, and they decided that only 16 were going to be eligible, and those are the ones which they're considering. We know Powys had 48 roads requested. Monmouthshire had roads requested, but having evaluated them all, they've decided that they're not changing any roads at all. And similarly with other authorities, there were many roads requested, but many were discounted as not being appropriate. And remember that the requested roads were just ones which came from the general public, and there was no more justification than somebody writing in to say, I'd like the speed limit on this road increase. Wrexham, there were 45 roads involved which were requested, and they have actually set all 45, which will be increasing to 30 miles an hour. So what's the scale of this in terms of the national impact? Well, we've taken, I guess, a range of figures, which is comparing Wrexham with 45 to Monmouthshire with nothing. The average length of roads in Wrexham was actually 774 metres. So there actually have set 35 kilometres of roads, changing from 20 mile an hour to 30 miles an hour. And we estimate that per local authority, we think the average is going to be 25 roads, which will come to 19 kilometres per authority, or 425 kilometres across the whole of Wales. Now, yes, the current length of 20 mile an hour roads in Wales is about 13,500 kilometres. So that will result in about 3.2% of existing 20 mile an hour roads changing to 30 miles an hour. So again, in order to look at some of the differences in roads. Sorry, I hadn't advanced the slide there. So these are the figures. So let's look at some of the roads which are being changed. And here we've taken some examples from Wrexham, because that's probably got the TRO, which has been gone right the way through the whole process to the decision being made by the executive board of the council. And that included roads like this, which were clearly an anomaly. That had been set at 20 mile an hour because it was a restricted road, and it wasn't accepted back in September 23 by the local authority. Here's another road where they wish to create a buffer. So again, this road is being set at 30 miles an hour. It was previously not accepted and set to 30 mile an hour, and that is becoming a buffer. It's worthwhile notice that in some authorities, they did set experimental traffic regulation orders on roads to set them at 30 miles an hour back in September 2023. Some of these are now being turned into permanent 30 mile an hour limits with associated regulation orders. It's worthwhile noticing, though, that there's a little bit of inconsistency which we're seeing. We're seeing that authorities will make that balanced judgment with regard to roads changing to 30 miles an hour. The place criteria are really quite specific, that 30 mile an hour would not be appropriate near educational settings or within 100 meters of community facilities. Yet here we have one of the roads in Wrexham. This is Chester Road in Gresford. Within 100 meters of that road, we have a primary school, a nursery, a community centre, and a church, all within 100 meters. Now, this is a decision which that particular highway authority has made. It's perhaps difficult to understand when you see that less than a kilometre away, there is a large dual carriageway, which means that journeys within Gresford are almost all going to be local journeys rather than long distance journeys. But that is a responsibility which the local authority has. What will be the impact nationally? We think little change. It's approximately 3% of current 20-mile-an-hour roads or 1% of Welsh road network. Locally, most will have minimal impact. We're looking at saving seconds in journey time. It will correct the obviously anomalies which there were, and it will optimize the 20 and 30-mile-an-hour mix within communities. But a minority of those roads could well increase risks, especially to vulnerable road users, and create highway authority potential liabilities. So there are some concerns that the increase in speed from 20 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour should be done appropriately. I'd like to thank you all. We do have a Welsh 20 mile an hour FAQ section on our website, and that covers a wide range of subjects which can help inform you about many aspects of the change to the 20 mile an hour default in Wales. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rod. That's really clear. And I thought I was really interested in some of the pictures you showed, because a couple of those are clearly inappropriately changed to 20 in September 2023, and it's good to see those are going to 30 and being accepted at 30, which is quite right. I mean, it's also interesting, I think, that even if all of the suggested changes, exceptions are confirmed, it's going to be a small impact on the number of roads that go from 20 to 30. I do wonder, particularly with respect to the one you showed about Chester Road in Gresford, whether the full legal implications of increasing local speed limit on a road like that has been thought through. I think there may be some issues there, but we can come to that. So thanks, Richard. So we've heard from Phil about the casualty reduction benefits in Wales, and we've heard from Rod about the limited changes to local speed limits. How is that manifesting itself in the map of speed limits, and what are we seeing in England?
Okay, thank you, Adrian, and good to see you all on this webinar this lunchtime. What I'm going to do is show you a little bit of analysis that we've been doing recently around the distribution of speed limits, but also some other information as well. Now, this has been coming together really at the last minute. We've still been looking and getting some findings out there. We've created this amazing research database out there, and I'm really interested in your thoughts, everybody on the webinar today, about the results that we're showing, and also the other unanswered questions that we're still going to have. So yeah, as we mentioned in the introduction, Richard Owen from Agilysis. We carry out lots of work looking at road safety data, and also through our sister company Insight Warehouse, we manage what is effectively the national map of speed limits as well. We were really happy to help provide evidence, some of which has already been shown by Phil as well, about where 20 mile per hour was implemented slightly differently in Wales. So it really just showed the power of having really good quality information. So let me just go through over the next few minutes what we've been looking at here. So these are the topics that I'm covering. So lots of different questions there about what don't we know about speed limits, what data is available to help, and then go through some of the results and then show you some answers. This illustrates the problem of trying to understand what's happening on roads. So this is straight out of DFT Stats 19 through another software program that we use called Master Online. So if you just have a look at casualties on 20 mile per hour roads, it looks like a disaster. But of course, anybody that's sensible will understand, well, wait a minute, the number of roads that have been subject to 20 miles an hour has increased. So, you know, we would expect to see that the number of collisions would increase. This wouldn't necessarily stop detractors of safe urban speed limits using this kind of evidence to try and back up some kind of argument against them. But what it does show is that we need to understand how many roads are covered by 20 miles an hour, where they look like, so that we can then possibly start to think about what casualty reduction looks like. And I'm definitely thinking about this from a GB kind of perspective. Because Wales did what Wales did, it made it incredibly easy to do the analysis and show the positive results, which Phil demonstrated earlier. But if we're trying to do it elsewhere, you really need to know which roads have changed. So how do we do that? So because we run Speed Map, we have access to information showing where speed limits are. So here's a typical map of a town in England, happened to be the one that I grew up in, Daventry in Northamptonshire. And it shows, you know, really how complex speed limits are. You've got various 60-mile-per-hour speed limits there. You've got some 40s. You've got a little bit of 20 going on in there, some 30s, and then you've got some lower speed limits on industrial estates, you know, sub 20-mile-per-hour limits, for example. So because we've got access to this map for every single road in the country, it means that we can do some quite cool stuff with the analysis. So the approach that we chose to do in this was, rather than trying to analyze individual roads, look at areas of the country, because it can be quite hard when you're looking at a map to understand what's really happening in terms of the picture of what's been going on. So what we did is we mapped the data, and I'm going to show you the big list of data in a moment, against lower layer super output areas. Now, many of you on the call may not be aware of what these are, so I've got some information in here, and of course these slides will be shared later on. So yeah, if you'd like to understand more about small area geographies and how it works in England and Wales and Scotland separately, you can definitely have a look at those. So that's what we've done, and that's what I'm going to be basing our analysis on. It's basically a neighbourhood analysis. So what did we do? What data did we have in this? So the full report isn't available and isn't published yet. Will be coming out in the weeks ahead. So yeah, we'll make sure that we publicize that on LinkedIn. But yeah, we used that map of speed limits. Now, it is only the current speed limit that we have. It is not easy to go back and have a look at historically. Even though we've been editing this map for a number of years, it's not a straightforward task. You can get a good idea. We tend to only update the map once every 3 months, but most roads don't have a flag of saying when they were changed. So if you want to do some more in-depth analysis, you either need to wait 3 to 5 years for speed limits to change, or you'd need to start to have really good local knowledge on when speed limits have changed. And I'm sure many of you on the call will have that knowledge as well. It is normally a commercial data set, although people in the public sector can access this free of charge via Ordnance Survey, so that's worth knowing. So what then did we do? So we matched all of those roads that you saw my example of earlier, matched those to these small areas. We removed motorways, of course. We're not particularly interested in motorways within this. And then we calculated road length by speed limit. Then we added in another data set that we've got access to, and this one's really critical as well. This is average annual daily traffic. So because of some commercial arrangements that we have access to data for every single stretch of road. Now, some of this is calculated data, but we do find that it's pretty accurate, certainly within enough tolerance to enable us to be confident about the results. But yeah, we can understand what traffic looks like, because it's not just understanding the relationship between the length of road, it's about the traffic as well. And I've got some answers on that too. So yeah, here's an example of what that traffic map would look like. So the darker, so the red colours indicate the highest level of traffic. I've highlighted a specific road on the A5 there. You can see that we've got about 25,000 vehicles that are using that per day. We've got some data for individual directions of travel. But yeah, we've got that, and we use that within the analysis. What else do we put in? Right, so because we're using these super output areas, we could put in information about the population, so the number of people that live in those areas. There's also an urban and rural classification too. So this is something that's done by Office for National Statistics, and they basically say it's either an urban or a rural area. And then finally, the other one is the index of multiple deprivation. So I won't read through the words, make sure that I stick to my time allocation. But yeah, IMD is a measure of relative deprivation. But it allows us to have a look and see how 20 miles per hour has been rolled out in areas of higher or lower deprivation to see if there's been any inequality in that rollout there. So what did we find in our analysis? So we know that there are around 62,000 kilometres of 20 miles per hour roads in Great Britain. When you express that as a percentage of all roads that are 20 or 30, it's about 27%. Now that's for all roads. That includes some of those rural roads as well. When you just look at those urban areas using that classification, the percentage rises a bit, which is already pointing to something here, is that rural communities don't seem to have the same access to safe urban speed limits as people who live in cities. So there's already a disparity that's going on there. And I know that's been picked up in some of the work in Wales, where you've had rural communities that perhaps have benefited from those new speed limits. When we look at the traffic analysis, though, we see a slightly different story. So actually, using that figure, we can see that only 18.4% of traffic on urban roads is in 20s. Now, actually, this does make a lot of sense because, we don't get as much traffic on the roads where people live. And the roads that exceptions might be applied to, because exceptions have been applied all over the country as well, tends to mean that you have high levels of traffic on 30 roads, which is kind of what we want, isn't it? I think. But it does mean that when people are talking about the rise of 20 miles per hour, it's not actually affecting the same proportion of journeys as it does for the proportion of roads. Here's the big figure. This is our latest estimate of the number of people who live in an area covered by 20 miles per hour. The calculations are a little bit complicated, but it's about 22 million people. And I know 20's Plenty have their own calculations on this as well. I'm happy to share the methodology on that one too. One thing we did find, though, is that there is a serious disparity, as you may expect, in the distribution of 20 miles per hour across the whole of Great Britain. So here are the top 10. These are the areas of the country that have the highest level of distribution. I have only focused on those urban roads, though. I haven't taken into account those rural roads, which is why if you look at Anglesey on there, it looks like the road length is really low, but actually it's just the urban areas of Anglesey. So yeah, you can see City of London, well done. The first authority area that has achieved 100%. They have no 30 mile per hour limits within their area. There could be some mapping errors in here that actually means that maybe Westminster was 100% as well, but that gives you a good idea. But we've got this for everywhere in the country. And that means I can show you this very sad list as well, which is the full list of areas that have 0 or very close to 0 20 miles per hour. They're just 30 mph zones. Some of them will have really short road lengths though, but there's an example of those areas that don't have any. But what I am able to do is to show you this in a lot more detail. So this is an interactive map that we've created, and through the power of the internet, I should quickly be able to zip through to this. So this is the interactive map. So the links on there, you'll be able to get access to this. I've only done it for those urban areas. So what you can see in blue, obviously in Wales, if I zoom in a little bit here, these are all of those neighbourhoods that are covered by predominantly 20. So blue is 20, red is predominantly 30. So yeah, you can have a look at Bristol as well. Zoom in on there. We all know that Bristol and Bath have a high percentage of 20. If we move across towards Oxfordshire, Oxford, famously went to 20 over a decade ago. But you can also see some areas of Oxfordshire that have started to become more 20 as part of their rollout. So, you've got Whitney around there, so I can zoom in and out there. But you can see that Banbury, where our offices are based in Agilysis, has only just switched over to 20 just within the last couple of weeks. So it's not showing on that map at the moment. So yeah, you can zoom out, and then so anybody can access this. You can see how the West Midlands is really quite patchy in terms of distribution. Let me scroll further up. You can see the amazing efforts that have happened in the Northwest. I know that within within Merseyside, within parts of Greater Manchester, certainly within Lancashire as well. So we look at Preston and Lancaster there, really big rollouts of 20. So yeah, Leeds as well, we can see that on that list. Scroll up to where I am today, Edinburgh, delivering some training up here in Scotland. You can see that Edinburgh's blue, but Glasgow's largely red. So hopefully you will find this reasonably interesting to have a look at. You can click on any individual area and it will bring a pop-up on there that shows you the percentage of urban. Sorry, these fields aren't labelled very well, but it just shows that urban 20%. So 100% of all roads within this part of Edinburgh are 20. Let me just finally go through the remainder of the results on here. So I mentioned IMD decile. So this is now showing the percentage of urban 20 miles per hour by IMD decile. So we can see that in those more deprived neighbourhoods, they're the ones with the lowest numbers. We do see that there's been more of a rollout of 20 there. And that's good because we know from other analysis with road safety data that people who come from and live in more deprived areas are much more likely to be injured than those who are in other areas. But it does again show that there's been less of a distribution of 20 within more affluent areas. So what have we got? We've got safe urban speeds that are now increasingly common, but there has been huge variation in implementation. We do see that rural urban speeds, those small villages, are often much higher, not seeing as much of that, and that there has been that greatest distribution in terms of areas of greater deprivation. But I showed you a casualty chart at the beginning, and I wasn't able to produce you any results on casualties because it's incredibly complicated. We need to know about those implementation dates. It would be great if we could have some kind of analysis of before and after for all of those other areas in England. To some extent, we don't need to because Wales has done such a great job there. We did match collision data to individual roads. It did show that crash rates appeared to be higher in 20 mile per hour limits, but we think there's a lot of other confounding factors that are going on there. Obviously, it's unreliable without those implementation dates, but we think there's other factors that are influencing links. So we'd really like to understand that more, and that's something we'd like to do more work on over the years ahead. We also don't know anything about 20 mile per hour limits versus zones, so we don't know anything about the influence of traffic calming features. So that's me, and hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's been I can see that how much time if I click on those links, I'm going to be wasting an awful lot of time looking at those maps because they're just brilliant. What's really interesting for me is that all the headlines have been about Wales, but actually local authorities in England and Scotland are rolling out 20 miles an hour. And actually, I think from your figures, if I've got them right, there are more 20 miles an hour roads outside of Wales than there are in Wales. Is that right?
In terms of absolute length, yes, that's right. But in terms of percentage, it wouldn't be. I didn't include that in the analysis, but I'll have a look at it later.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I mean, maybe we can. But what we'll do is in the panel session, we'll have a longer discussion about the different approaches in all four of the UK nations. I think that's probably worth there's certainly questions coming up about that. But before I come to Rob, actually, just one thing. You referred to the current speed data, and you said it's available to all local authorities. Is that right? And is it free of charge?
Yes, it is. So there's something called the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, which anybody can Google. But it basically means that anybody from a public sector organisation, not just local authorities, can have access to that map of speed limits. It also means that people can spot any errors that are on there. And if anybody does spot an error, just let me know because I'd love to get it updated.
I think I've spotted an error because I think there's some I think this is 20 miles an hour in Hastings, but we can come to that. But let's come back to that actually in the chat in the panel discussion, because it'd just be interesting to see how local authorities currently, of course, local authorities use speed tubes to measure data, measure speeds. Let's come back to that in the panel discussion. So Rob, you're going to tell us, I think, that as well as seeing the human benefit in terms of fewer injuries and deaths, we're finding that drivers are also benefiting financially. Tell us more.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Absolutely that. Hello all. Thank you very much for having me along. My name's Rob Clark. I've been a motor underwriter for the last 26 years, and I can categorically say that the two most impactful things I've seen on motor risk rates in my career have been COVID and the impacts of all the lockdowns, which I think Phil showed you in one of his slides, and then this. This is certainly the impact of the Wales 20-mile-an-hour change has had a fairly significant, a massively material impact on claim frequency. I will attempt to make this as untechnical as possible, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them into Q&A and I will answer them afterwards. So this slide is from a piece of analysis that I completed in October 2023. It is very true to the presentation I gave to our risk board inside esure, and basically flows as following. So we were seeing a reduction in our AD frequency. What I mean by AD frequency is the rate at which people are putting a claim in for their own vehicle was decreasing, and it was reducing in the test sites just prior to over a significant period of time. So if you look at where we were back in 2019, you can see that the test sites were having a fairly hopefully you can all see my pointer. We're seeing a fairly large, much higher rate of claim than either Wales itself in totality or the rest of Great Britain. Fast forward to the tests actually coming in, us coming out of the pandemic, which is here, and actually that delta, that difference in rate of accident, rate of frequency between the two lines has changed materially. It's more than halved. What we were seeing was a reduction in the AD risk of about a fifth, and that reduces something that we call our manufacturing costs of producing a policy by about 10%. We followed this up inside esure by deploying discounts immediately to all of Wales in order to reflect that lower risk, because it was A, we feel that it was massively appropriate, and B, we thought we were ahead of the game, we'd be able to write some more policies. So that was 2023. What's happened a year on? Has the change persisted? Well, I'm frankly amazed by what I see when we look at accidental damage and third-party car frequency. So why accidental damage and third-party car frequency? That's us measuring how often somebody is having an accident and claiming for it in their own car, and how often they're hitting another car. So this is a measurement of car-on-car frequency. And you can see the two lines are always very close together, with the green line being third-party car, poking out below quite a bit every now and again. From the moment the change went in, we saw a 20% reduction. That went through all the way through the 12 months up to the point, and this is all indexed back to June 23, up to October 2024. This number here and this number here are virtually the same. It's about a 15 to 20% reduction in the number of claims we're seeing coming through from Wales, which is, as I said before, absolutely unprecedented. What you see when you look at the difference in the year-on-year index, so if you compare what's happening at any given point in time to 12 months previously, is in this graph, and you're seeing at some points in time, so January 2024, a 35-ish% reduction in the index. So the risk of incident has reduced by almost a third, and these aren't these are real life people. We insure tens, if not hundreds, tens of thousands of people in Wales. I've literally never seen anything like it. The return to 0% at the end here is exactly what you'd expect after a material change. That just means that the index has stopped moving, the decreases have leveled out, and we're in a fairly steady state. So we're pretty comfortable that not only has the change in speed limits in Wales had a material impact on accident frequency, but actually that impact is persisting and will be long lasting as long as the speed limits remain the way they are. So Wales a year on, when my job is really quite straightforward when you consider when we're considering risk. I have to understand the rate at which somebody is going to have a claim, so the likelihood someone is going to have an accident, the likely cost of that accident, how much it will cost me over and above that for what we determine as large losses. Large losses are claims that are above £100,000 in nature, quite often involve cyclists, pedestrians, almost always life-changing incidents. Then how much it costs me to run an insurance company, the taxes I have to charge to all of our customers, and any levies that I need to pull through as well. So that's for things like Thatcham and the MIB. When you take all of that into account, you add it all together, you come to the annual premium that I charge to you, that I quote to you on the aggregators, on the price comparison websites. So we need to consider all of these things. The first two parts of this, the accident frequency and the average cost of accident, are what we would refer to as our manufacturing cost. That's the amount of money we would need to collect per risk in order to just satisfy the claims costs that are associated, the car hitting wall claims costs. It's a lot more complicated than that, I promise, but keep it high level. So Wales year on year, what has actually happened to claims costs? And this is something that I didn't expect to that I didn't expect to be talking about, but in complete transparency, what we see is Wales' average claims cost before the change was historically lower than England, excluding London, and it's not as soon as, but as you move past the point in which the change came in, we actually start seeing average claims costs in Wales to creeping above that benchmark baseline of England excluding London. Why is it England excluding London? London has been implementing its own traffic calming measures and is a fairly unique population when it comes to road risk or risk on the road. Anybody that has driven anywhere near London into Greater London will understand that it's easier to compare risk to England excluding London, or even to Scotland. In this instance, the baseline we chose was England. England. What we see is claims costs starting to poke up above that which we would see from the comparison population, and those year-on-year changes in claims costs are actually quite spiky. Now, what we see in that is a lot of the low speed accidents that would have happened on a 30-mile-an-hour road have gone, and we're left with higher speed incidents on A roads and incidents where people are speeding in 20-mile-an-hour roads. That people will not always abide by the speed limits. We expected that. That's something that we quite often see when an impact happens that reduces the frequency. We see the cost of the claim go up because we tend to see some of the lower severity claims leave our ecosystem. So what does that mean to the burning cost, the cost of manufacturing? And actually, what does this mean to Wales in totality? So a year on, in order to give you a view of what average premiums would have looked like in Wales, with and without the change. What I've opted to do here is from the point the change went in, almost link the cost of insuring a vehicle in Wales to the pattern exhibited by England. It's not perfect in the back years, but it does follow the English line around. Link it perfectly, and then just allow the actual burning costs that we see come through from Wales to actually flow through. And what we see is a general decrease in burning costs across all groups. We are seeing a reduction in accident frequency across the UK. That part of that is all the fantastic work that Richard demonstrated in the Northwest and some of the city centres in England. It's also an increase in vehicle technology coming through. But what we can say is the Welsh, or the impact of the 20-mile-an-hour zone in 20-mile-an-hour zones in Wales, apologies, was to reduce the burning cost, or to show a reduced burning cost compared to England of about 24%. So that means for every £100 I'm collecting in England, I would need to collect £75 in Wales for a similar risk. If you were to remove the impact of the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, that reduction actually reduces to 16%. So I'm needing to collect £84 in the 100 compared to England excluding Wales. Oh, it's England excluding London, apologies. So in terms of what that means to premiums, so if we take the modelled burning cost for Wales post speed limit change, the actual burning cost, allow for large losses in operating costs and IPT, it gives the following table. So the average premium emerging out of England is around £540. The modelled cost that Wales would have had to pay if the speed limits hadn't gone in would have been about £455, and the actual cost is about 410. So the counterfactual gives us a £45 uplift when you assess Wales modelled against Wales actual. I think there's a couple of things that Richard mentioned in his presentation that are really salient here. Wales made wholesale changes to their environment. It was easier for us to pick up those changes because they changed the entire system at once, and we got a really strong signal from it. And we work with Rod and Adrian, have done for the last 16 months to actively hunt out 20-mile-an-hour zones that are being implemented to see if we can pick up these changes elsewhere. And one of the things that we're finding is where 20-mile-an-hour zones are being deployed, or roads are being changed to 20 miles an hour discreetly. So what I mean by that is a 500-metre stretch of road outside a school. We're not seeing a lot of signal come through. We're not seeing the frequencies drop down as much because at either end of that 20-mile-an-hour zone is a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and people are it's either not impactful enough to reduce the accidents at either end, or people are moving at 30 miles an hour at both ends, and that's just maintaining the rate of incident. I think that was my time. I think I'm on time, Adrian. I look forward to the panel session.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. So just to that last point, just to emphasise this. So if somebody says, "Oh yeah, well we approve of 20 miles an hour outside schools," are you telling me from a commercial aspect that's not going to move the dial?
It's certainly not coming through in any of our analysis that it's changing accident rates. It will certainly be safer in that portion of road, Adrian, but children don't just walk down that part of the street, right?
Yeah.
And everything that I see and have seen over the last 26 years is the moment you start considering things in a discrete way, you lose the impactfulness of change. You need to consider the entire thing in more of a systems thinking kind of way, and understanding how cars move from A to B. Actually, by controlling speed in a more holistic manner, you reduce risk far more substantially than trying to localize activity.
You probably don't know, Rob, that my background is also in risk in a completely different environment. And that's actually exactly what I've seen. It's about systemic change. It's not about the individual things. Of course you want to look at them, but actually that's not the big driver of costs. You said I think £45 per driver. That seems to be the model benefit. I mean, that's great, and that for an individual person that sounds great. But I mean, we just need to think about that total cost of that, or the total potential saving to the UK economy is. I mean, I guess it's north of £1 billion, isn't it?
I must admit, I've not done that part of the maths. I've not gone into when I've calculated it across the entirety of the UK, it's about £50. If we moved every 30-mile-an-hour zone or appropriate 30-mile-an-hour road to 20-mile-an-hour, I've calculated the saving to the average driver to be about £50. So the £45 number that we saw from Wales was a bit of a relief, if I'm being honest. But so it's nice to see it come through in reality. When you consider that there's about 27 million cars on the road, if each one of those is paying £50, it's a lot more than £1 billion. Okay. And that money gets to flow into the economy in another way, and helps individual families.
Well, maybe the government workforce on trying to lower insurance premiums should be sitting up and taking. Well, I hope they are taking notice of this, because this really it's not just the human benefit, is it? It's a financial benefit as well. And I was always told follow the money, because that's actually more convincing than stats in a way.
Yes, I'll absolutely agree with that. I think what we're seeing is really compelling from a economic perspective in terms of real life economics. The savings people make when you couple it with the strain on the NHS and the strain of individual stresses of families, and the fact that there are literally hundreds of people that are walking around now that wouldn't have been otherwise. I can't see how anybody can think this changes anything other than positive. From a purely financial objective perspective, this has been the most impactful systemic change I have ever seen in motor risk.
Very good. I mean, that sort of follows. We've got a calculator on our website which shows that for each local authority, each highway authority can look up and see what the payback period is, and we find it's usually under 6 months in terms of the total benefit you get from it.
Absolutely, and I mean, I'm quite nerdy about these things. I'd more than happily sit down with you and go through that calculator, because when you take into account things like road surfaces and repair periods that follow, I mean, you're saving so much money. I think one of the questions we had, I don't know if you want to save it for the panel, was around emissions.
If other panel members can put their screens on and get ready, do you want to just answer that particular point now?
Yeah. So the emissions piece, I would love to say that I've dived into emissions as a result of the 20-mile-an-hour zones. I haven't. What I do know is cars emit fewer, or vehicles generally emit a lower amount of carbon dioxide when you're revving the engine lower. So as long as you're going at a low speed and an appropriate gear, then absolutely the emissions will reduce.
Well, that's my experience from just watching my miles per gallon. As soon as I hit the throttle, it goes way down. And if I'm just constant speed, then I can see a massive benefit. So look, thanks very much everybody for your contributions up, and I think that whole thing worked really well together, and they're complementary presentations there. So look, we've had hundreds of questions. I've got over 100 have been sent in advance, so I can see dozens and dozens on the screen. If you want to answer them individually, please just go ahead and do that. I've just got a few that I thought I'd somehow summarize the questions which have been put in. We had a lot of people asking about the implementation and rollout of 20 miles an hour in Wales. What could we have done to improve it? Are there things which could have been made better? I'm happy for anybody to jump in to that.
Perhaps I could jump in there. I think the communications should have been better. I think I chaired the task force. We were very clear there should have been a huge amount of engagement with the Welsh public. I think COVID didn't help. That didn't help. There were Senate elections. So I can understand, a lot of the Welsh population being rather kind of surprised by this and not feeling there was enough engagement, both by the national government and then by local authorities when they were planning their exceptions. So I think the hindsight, and again, a lesson that I quickly said, I think, engagement with the public. But what I would say, just picking up one of the questions I've just answered in the chat, it's very easy for people to get the impression that 20 miles per hour is unpopular, because there's always a tendency for those people who feel they're losing out from a change, speak out more loudly. And there is this, the silent majority is a real thing. So if we are going to engage with the public, we have to do so in a way that is really representative and make sure we capture all the voices, both positive and negative. I mean, for example, what would children think about slower speeds? But we don't often ask them, do we? So I think, yes, engage, but engage really carefully.
Yeah, I would very much endorse that. Usually in implementations around the country, we've come to the figure of 10 to 20% to be spent on engagement. That's the percentage of the total spend for 20 mile an hour as a norm in a local authority. I think the figure in Wales was about 3%. So we shouldn't be surprised that the benefit message didn't get out there. But one of the things which I would say about Wales is that there are lots of issues, where the public would respond in a certain way if you said, well, we'll look at increasing taxes or doing this or doing that. But the point about Wales and 20 mile an hour is that the Welsh public have been actually signalling their acceptance, not by necessarily raising their right hand, but by raising their right foot. And that's what's made a difference. And really, if you go to Wales, you would see a marked difference in the pace of vehicles on those community streets. Everything is just that bit calmer. And you really do notice that come back into places in England where 30 mile an hour is a norm and everything is so much busier and happening so quicker. And that's why the casualties have reduced in Wales.
And just briefly as well, mentioned the change in speeds there. That's something that we analysed the week after by looking at some connected vehicle data. It was astonishing how accepted it was by drivers because they changed their behaviour. The other thing that we found in that as well is that there's generally a misunderstanding about the speeds that we travel at when we're driving our cars. We're not all driving around at 30 just because it's a 30 limit. We're finding that average speeds were actually more like 23 miles per hour. I think communicating that message to people that just because the limit is there doesn't mean that you're generally doing that limit. I'm up here in Scotland at the moment talking about their potential change to rural speeds. So reducing the national speed limit from 60 down to 50. Part of the education there that we've been doing is saying average speeds are 51 at the moment. The limit just needs to change. 20 miles an hour just makes sense because it's actually the speed that most people are choosing to travel at anyway.
Yeah, a huge amount of it is just change management, isn't it? I find it hard to believe, you don't often hear people in shop, along the pavement or something saying, "Oh God, I wish these cars were going faster along here." It'd be much nicer for it to be to be noisier and more dangerous to cross the road, wouldn't it? What are the lessons here for England? Do we need to have a national speed reduction, a national speed limit reduction, as did in Wales? Do we need to follow what Scotland is doing, rolling it out nationally, but local authority by local authority? Do we need to change the guidance? What's the best thing to do?
I would certainly, Joe, I think we definitely need to change the guidance. I mean, sorry, getting technical. Circular 113, 1/13 is the English Department of Transport guidance on setting speed limits, and it says that if the existing speeds are 24 or above, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits won't make much difference. And that's simply not true. We know that is not true. We have lots of evidence, not just from Wales, but from Scottish borders, from Oxfordshire, from Cornwall. We know that is not true. So that has to be changed. I mean, it would be great to think of that England would do what Wales has done. I think politically that might be just too difficult, but perhaps a Scottish approach of 20 being a policy default in urban areas, and then you choose to retain 30 where it's appropriate and safe. I think that perhaps is more within the reach. But yeah.
I think one of the biggest differences between Wales and England was that Wales had very few 20-mile-an-hour limits. There weren't any 20-mile-an-hour cities or 20-mile-an-hour towns. There were just 20-mile-an-hour primarily around schools. There was a great opportunity, therefore, to change the mindsets, change the default. And with it, there were advantages with regards to signage and repeater signs and so on. We're in a different situation in England in that we have whole authorities where 20-mile-an-hour is completely the norm. So we've got a hybrid situation. We've got to somehow bring forward those other authorities so that it can have that norm, and we've got to do it in a way which actually overcomes some of those legislative and sort of restrictive things like the way in which we handle repeater signs and so on. The simple way is to say it should be policy that actually 20-mile-an-hour is the norm, and we accept up where it's justified and when it's where it's evidentially safe to meet society's expectations. But we also need to do that in a way which overcomes this problem with repeater signs, etc., being required where a speed limit is not the national speed limit. We have to accept that we don't have a national 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in the UK. It's completely compromised. Authority after authority has says, no, it doesn't work for us. We want 20 mile an hour as a norm. So we need to move to a situation where a local authority can put up boundary signs as gateways, which really say 20 mile an hour unless otherwise signed. It's quite simple, right? But it needs a change in mindset at the DFT to modify the signage regulations slightly to allow that, and also change that policy, which says, yes, have targeted 30 mile an hour where it's appropriate. But for most of the people, most of the streets, most of the time, 20 is plenty, where we're actually having motor vehicles sharing that public space with people who are not in motor vehicles.
Thanks, Sean. So I'm really conscious of time, and I want to just get to one or two more questions because we're approaching the end now. One of the biggest things that comes up all the time is about enforcement and how to get compliance. And there's sort of the thing is the two questions are linked. Is it about physical measures? Is it about technology? Is it financial penalties? Or is it just education about the human consequences of driving faster? I'm going to come to Rob first, if I may, just to talk a bit about the financial. But Phil, could you also talk a bit about the UGAIN or UGAIN initiative after Rob's spoken?
Sorry, after I've spoken. Oh,
sorry, Rob, I just wanted to ask about sort of financial implication of compliance. And do we need financial benefit? Do we always do it for financial penalties, or is it, are there other education and technology?
The enforcement structure we have in the UK for controlling speed limits is fine today, isn't it? I mean, we have a fairly well managed way of pushing that through. I think the way the Welsh did it was really rather sensible, which was actually phasing the enforcement in over time, and pushing that through and allowing the road going users to adapt to the new speed limits, because it was an overnight change, and that's I definitely tipped my hat there and thought that was incredibly smart. I think there are financial downsides to speeding, absolutely. Your premiums will go up if you are caught speeding, and you have to declare that to us. Speed does contribute to accidents, not just inside my my presentation. Excess speed or people that drive at excess speeds tend to have 20% more crashes than a normal road user. It's all there in relative black and white.
Thanks. Bill, did you want to just comment on the UGAIN?
EGAIN. You in Welsh is an E. Operation EGAIN. It's just really interesting. So the police have the power to stop motorists when they're going too fast, and they just offered this choice. If you're absolutely in a rush and you have to get on your way, go and you take the 3 points. But if you have half an hour to spare, come into this classroom and listen to some fire and rescue officers telling you why driving at 20 miles an hour is a really good idea for you and your loved ones. And it's really interesting. And the reason that the fire and rescue officers were asked to do that, partly, I mean, they really wanted to do it because they have, the difficult job of cutting people out of crashed vehicles. But also apparently the public like fire and rescue people much more than they like policemen or police constables. So they're more receptive to that message. But I think it's really interesting, and I think it seems to me to potentially to be something that could be looked at in the rest of the UK.
Yeah, sorry, as a graduate at Aberystwyth University, I should know that as EGAIN, not sorry. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if you see a policeman, even yesterday when I was approached by a policeman, I thought, what have I done? Whereas if it's fire and rescue, oh, that's interesting. So it feels very very different. I was just going to ask one other question sort of related to that, which is around how the police forces are reacting, because I think in Wales they were originally a bit sceptical, and we've seen that because they worry, the police forces worry that they're going to see more people ringing them up and saying, why aren't you enforcing on my road?
Of course.
Whereas I think what the Welsh police are now doing is that they're seeing fewer casualties and thinking, great, we don't have to attend so many call-outs. And I think that's also what's happening in Thames Valley with Thames Valley Police, because again, originally I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe they're rather sceptical about 20 miles an hour. And because Oxfordshire's rolled it out, they're now much more supportive. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, certainly it was really interesting. I mean, the very first task force meeting we had back in 2019, I think the only people in the room with their arms folded were the representatives of the police, which is quite interesting. So, but attitudes did change during the course of the project. I think they understood, and there were policy shifts that went on, and the police are now very supportive in Wales, as is Go Safe, and there has been that change. I think it's partly the fear of being stretched with enforcement. I think also the police, like to police with consent is a phrase that they use, and the perception is, and I talked about this kind of misperception earlier, that it's very easy to form the view that 20 miles an hour is unpopular, and a lot of decision makers perceive that because of the way the press report it, and and so on, and social media. And so police may perhaps react to that by thinking, well, if we are, ticketing people at 25, we're going to be very unpopular. But actually, we also know where 20 mile an hour comes in. There is support for enforcement. So, and of course, in Wales, because so much of the network was 30 and is now 20, any enforcement they were doing in 30s can now be just done in 20. So it doesn't have to be an increase in resources.
Yes, before we just run out of
Yeah.
time there, Adrian, that every time, and as Phil was talking about this, my mind immediately went back to all of the fun and games that various governments had around the introduction of seatbelts, and the fact that it took 20 years to get seatbelts introduced. And when you look back at the rationale for not introducing that legislation earlier, it was because it would be difficult to enforce. It would not be popular with the general population. It's almost impossible for police to be able to keep track of all of this. They are all of the arguments against 20 mile an hour that I'm hearing today. And I think history has proven the introduction of seatbelts has saved lives. The introduction of 20 mile an hour zones as the new urban speed limits will save lives.
Thanks, Rob. So before I come to Rod, just to give us a quick reflection and 1 minute wrap up, is there anything else that I've missed from you? Look, there are hundreds of questions. We haven't answered them all. We'll try and do that afterwards. Is there anything anybody else thinks burning we wants to say? If not, I'll go to Rod and ask him just to give a quick reflection of where we are, and then we can end the session.
I'd just say one little thing. I think people have this view, and an understandable view, that if we don't achieve compliance, that it's failed.
Yeah.
And I think we have to get past that. Yes, of course we want compliance, but that may come in time. What is better? Is it better that someone is driving 29 in a 30 or 26 in a 20? I would say 26 in a 20.
Agreed.
So we have to understand that is success and not failure. And that 26 will come down over time with education, with enforcement, with traffic calming, with technology in cars, and public and peer pressure. And that's what we have to, but let's not wait until we have these low speeds before we put in the 20 mile an hour limit. It's simply delaying the benefit. So
thanks. Rod, anything to add in conclusion?
I look back and I think of back in 2018, where this was just an idea that Wales could set a national default speed limit, and so many questions which there were about, well, does it work, would it work, and so on. And then I look back to when it was done, and people were saying, well, we can't tell much from the first quarter's data. So we then waited until the 6-month data. Well, you can't take much from that, and then 9-month data, but now we've got a year's data. We've got all these professionals analyzing that, and the data talks, right? Because the data isn't influenced by whether you want to win an election next month, right? Or whether you've got this issue or that issue, and that backs up everything which we know from every other 20 mile an hour implementation. So I really thank the way in which the three of you have explained those very specific perspectives which you have, and actually to do what we called that deep dive into that data, because you've dived into that data in ways which haven't been done before, and you've done it on a scale in the whole of Wales for over 3 million people that has never been done before. And you come back with that view: this works, this reduces speeds, this saves lives, it reduces casualties, and it saves money. And that really it is good that you've been able to use your skills and the data which you have access to present it so clearly today. So thank you very much. And as I said, thank you, Adrian, for all your work on this. It's been brilliant, and also Landor for hosting it, and not forgetting Hannah in the background, who has been answering some of the questions. So thank you all.
If we haven't answered your question, just please email us info@british-planes.org. We'll try and get those questions answered. Finally, from me, Landor, on the 15th of May, date for your diary, Landor and 20's Plenty, we're holding a physical conference at the Titanic Centre in Liverpool. It's entitled Delivering Vision Zero in the UK, Building on the Success of 20 mile an hour limits, and it directly follows on from today's webinar. So please put that in your diary. You'll see more from Landor Links about that conference in due course. Goodbye. And as they used to say, if you have been, thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers all.
Thank you.